Chapter 5 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 5. A warlike chapter, culminating in the flouting of the minister by the woman. "Mr. Dishart!" Jean had clutched at Gavin in Bank Street. Her hair was streaming and her wrapper but half buttoned. "Oh, Mr. Dishart, look at the mistress. I could not keep her in the manse." Gavin saw his mother beside him, bareheaded, trembling. "Oh, could I sit still, Gavin, and the town full of the skirls of women and bairns? Oh, Gavin, what can I do for them? They will suffer most this night." As Gavin took her hand, he knew that Margaret felt for the people more than he. "But you must go home, mother," he said, "and leave me to do my duty. I will take you myself if you will not go with Jean. Be careful of her, Jean." "Ay, will I," Jean answered, then burst into tears. "Mr. Dishart," she cried, "if they take my father, they'd best take me mither too." The two women went back to the manse, where Jean relit the fire, having nothing else to do, and boiled the kettle, while Margaret wandered in anguish from room to room. Men nearly naked ran past Gavin, seeking to escape from Thrums by the fields he had descended. When he shouted to them, they only ran faster. A Tillyloss weaver whom he tried to stop struck him savagely and sped past to the square. In Bank Street, which was full of people at one moment and empty the next, the minister stumbled over Charles Yuval. "Take me and welcome," Yuval cried, mistaking Gavin for the enemy. He had only one arm through the sleeve of his jacket, and his feet were bare. "I am Mr. Dishart. Are the soldiers already in the square, Yuval?" "They'll be there in a minute." And the man was so weak that Gavin had to hold him. "Be a man, Charles. You have nothing to fear. It is not such as you the soldiers have come for. If need be, I can swear that you had not the strength, even if you had the will, to join in the weavers' riot." "For God's sake, Mr. Dishart," Yuval cried, his hands chattering on Gavin's coat, "dinna swear that. My laddie was in the thick of the riot, and if he's ta'en, there's the poorhouse gaping for Kitty and me, for I couldna weave half a web a week. If there's a warrant agin onybody on the name of Yuval, swear it's me. Swear I'm a desperate character. Swear I'm michty strong for all I look palsied. And if when they take me my courage breaks down, swear on the mar. Swear I confessed my guilt to you on a book." As Yuval spoke, the quick rub-a-dub of a drum was heard. "The soldiers!" Gavin let go of his hold of the old man, who hastened away to give himself up. "That's no soldiers," said the woman. "It's the folk gathering in the square. This'll be a watery Sabbath in Thrums." "Rob Dow!" shouted Gavin, as Dow flung past with a scythe in his hand. "Lay down that scythe." "The hell wi' religion," Rob retorted fiercely. "It spoils a thing." "Lay down that scythe, I command you." Rob stopped undecidedly, then cast the scythe from him, but its rattle on the stones was more than he could bear. "I winna," he cried, and picking it up, ran to the square. An upper window in Bank Street opened, and Dr. McQueen put his head out. He was smoking as usual. "Mr. Dishart," he said, "you will return home at once if you are a wise man. Or better still, come in here. You can do nothing with these people to night." "I can stop their fighting." "You will only make black blood between them and you." "Dinna heed him, Mr. Dishart," cried some women. "You had better heed him," cried a man. "I will not desert my people," Gavin said. "Listen then to my prescription," the doctor replied. "Drive that gypsy lassie out of town before the soldiers reach it. She is firing the men to a red heat through sheer devilry." "She brocht the news, or we would have been nipped in our beds," some people cried. "Does any one know who she is?" Gavin demanded, but all shook their heads. The Egyptian, as they called her, had never been seen in these parts before. "Has any other person seen the soldiers?" he asked. "Perhaps this is a false alarm." "Several have seen them within the last few minutes," the doctor answered. "They came from Tillydrum and were advancing on us from the south, but when they heard that we had got the alarm they stopped at the top of the brae, near T'nowhead's farm. Man, you would take these things more coolly if you smoked." "Show me this woman," Gavin said sternly to those who had been listening. Then a stream of people carried him into the square. The square has altered little, even in these days of enterprise, when Tillyloss has become Newton Bank and the Craft Head Croft Terrace, with enamelled labels on them for the guidance of slow people who forget their address and have to run to the end of the street and look up every time they write a letter. The stones on which the butterwives sat have disappeared, and with them the clay walls and the outside stairs. Gone too is the stair of the townhouse, from the top of which the drummer roared the gossip of the week on Sabbaths to country folk, to the scandal of all who knew that the proper thing on that day is to keep your blinds down. But the townhouse itself, round and red, still makes the exit to the south troublesome. Wherever streets meet the square, there is a house in the centre of them, and thus the heart of Thrums is a box, in which the stranger finds himself suddenly wondering at first how he is to get out, and presently how he got in. To Gavin, who never before had seen a score of people in the square at once, here was a sight strange and terrible. Andrew Struthers, an old soldier, stood on the outside stair of the townhouse, shouting words of command to some 50 weavers, many of them scantily clad, but all armed with pikes and poles. Most were known to the little minister, but they wore faces that were new to him. Newcomers joined the body every moment. If the drill was clumsy, the men were fierce. Hundreds of people gathered around, some screaming, some shaking their fists at the old soldier, many trying to pluck their relatives out of danger. Gavin could not see the Egyptian. Women and old men, fighting for the possession of his ear, implored him to disperse the armed band. He ran up the townhouse stair, and in a moment it had become a pulpit. "Dinna dare to interfere, Mr. Dishart," Struthers said savagely. "Andrew Struthers," said Gavin solemnly, "in the name of God I order you to leave me alone. If you don't," he added ferociously, "I'll fling you over the stair." "Dinna heed him, Andrew," someone shouted, and another cried, "He canna understand our sufferings. He has dinner ilka day." Struthers faltered, however, and Gavin cast his eye over the armed men. "Rob Dow," he said, "William Carmichael, Thomas Whamond, William Munn, Alexander Hobart, Henders Haggart, step forward." These were the Ad Leaks, and when they found that the minister would not take his eyes off them, they obeyed, all save Rob Dow. "Never mind him, Rob," said the atheist Crookshanks. "It's better playing cards in hell than singing psalms in heaven." "Joseph Crookshanks," responded Gavin grimly, "you will find no cards down there." Then Rob also came to the foot of the stair. There was some angry muttering from the crowd, and young Charles Yuval exclaimed, "Curse you, would you lord it o'er us on weekdays as weel as on the Sabbath?" "Lay down your weapons," Gavin said to the 6 men. They looked at each other. Hobart slipped his pike behind his back. "I hae no weapon," he said slyly. "Let me hae my fling this nicht," Dow entreated, "and I'll promise to bide sober for a 12-month." "Oh, Rob," the minister said bitterly, "are you the man I prayed with a few hours ago?" The scythe fell from Rob's hands. "Down wi' your pikes," he roared to his companions, "or I'll brain you wi' them." "Ay, lay them down," the precentor whispered, "but keep your feet on them." Then the minister, who was shaking with excitement, though he did not know it, stretched forth his arms for silence, and it came so suddenly as to frighten the people in the neighbouring streets. "If he prays, we're done for," cried young Charles Yuval. But even in that hour many of the people were unbonneted. "O Thou who art the Lord of hosts," Gavin prayed, "we are in thy hands this night. These are thy people, and they have sinned. But thou art a merciful God, and they were sore tired, and knew not what they did. To thee, our God, we turn for deliverance, for without thee we are lost." The little minister's prayer was heard all around the square, and many weapons were dropped as an amen to it. "If you fight," cried Gavin, brightening as he heard the clatter of the iron on the stones, "your wives and children may be shot in the streets. These soldiers have come for a dozen of you. Will you be benefited if they take away 100?" "Oh, hearken to him," cried many women. "I winna," answered a man, "for I'm ane o' the dozen. Whaur's the Egyptian?" "Here." Gavin saw the crowd open, and the woman of Windyghoul came out of it, and while he should have denounced her, he only blinked, for once more her loveliness struck him full in the eyes. She was beside him on the stair before he became a minister again. "How dare you, woman?" he cried, but she flung a rowan berry at him. "If I were a man," she exclaimed, addressing the people, "I wouldna let myself be catched like a mouse in a trap." "We winna," some answered. "What kind o' women are you?" cried the Egyptian, her face gleaming as she turned to her own sex. that bid your men folk gang to gaol when a bold front would lead them to safety. Do you want to be husbandless and hammerless?" "Disperse, I command you," cried Gavin. "This abandoned woman is inciting you to riot." "Dinna heed this little man," the Egyptian retorted. It is curious to know that even at this anxious moment Gavin winced because she called him little. "She has the face of a mischief maker," he shouted, "and her words are evil." "You men and women of Thrums," she responded, "ken that I wish you weel by the service I hae done you this nicht. Wha telled you the soldiers was coming? It was you. It was you." "Ay, and mony a mile I ran to bring the news. Listen, and I'll tell you mair." "She has a false tongue," Gavin cried. "Listen not to this brazen woman." "What I have to tell," she said, "is as true as what I've telled already, and how true that is you a ken. You're wondering how the soldiers has come to a stop at the top of the brae instead of marching on the town. Here's the reason. They agreed to march straucht to the square if the alarm wasna given, but if it was, they were to break into small bodies and surround the town so that you could not get out. That's what they're doing now." At this the screams were redoubled, and many men lifted the weapons they had dropped. "Believe her not," cried Gavin. "How could a wandering gypsy know all this?" "Ay, how can you ken?" some demanded. "It's enough that I do ken," the Egyptian answered, "and this mair I ken, that the captain of the soldiers is confident he'll nab every one o' you that's wanted unless you do one thing." "What is it?" "If you are on different ways, you're lost, but if you keep together, you'll be able to force a road into the country whaur you can scatter. That's what he's fleid you'll do." "Then it's what we'll do." "It is what you will not do," Gavin said patiently. "The truth is not in this wicked woman." But scarcely had he spoken when he knew that startling news had reached the square. A murmur arose on the skirts of the mob, and swept with the roar of the sea towards the town house. A detachment of the soldiers were marching down the Roods from the north. "There's some coming frae the east town end," was the next intelligence, "and they've gripped Sanders Webster, and auld Charles Yuval has given himself up." You see, the gypsy said, flashing triumph at Gavin. "Lay down your weapons," Gavin cried, but his power over the people had gone. "The Egyptian spoke true," they shouted. "Dinna heed the minister." Gavin tried to seize the gypsy by the shoulders, but she slipped past him down the stair, and crying, "Follow me," ran round the town house and down the brae. "Woman," he shouted after her, but she only waved her arms scornfully. The people followed her, many of the men still grasping their weapons, but all in disorder. Within a minute after Gavin saw the gleam of the ring on her finger as she waved her hands, he and Dow were alone in the square. "She's an awful woman, that," Rob said. "I saw her lauching." Gavin ground his teeth. "Rob Dow," he said slowly, "if I had not found Christ, I would have throttled that woman. You saw how she flouted me?" End of chapter 5. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 6 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 6, in which the soldiers meet the Amazons of Thrums. Dow looked shamefacedly at the minister, and then set off up the square. "Where are you going, Rob?" "To gie myself up. I maun do something to let you see there's one man in Thrums that has mair faith in you than in Flisk Mahoy." "And only one, Rob. But I don't know that they want to arrest you." "Ay, I had a hand in tying the policeman to the " "I want to hear nothing about that," Gavin said quickly. "Will I hide then?" "I dare not advise you to do that. It would be wrong." Half a score of fugitives tore past the town house and were out of sight without a cry. There was a tread of heavier feet, and a dozen soldiers, with several policemen and 2 prisoners, appeared suddenly on the north side of the square. "Rob," cried the minister in desperation, "run!" When the soldiers reached the town house, where they locked up their prisoners, Dow was skulking eastward, and Gavin running down the brae. "They're fechting," he was told. "They're fechting on the brae. The soldiers is firing. A man's killed." But this was an exaggeration. The brae, though short, is very steep. There is a hedge on one side of it, from which the land falls away, and on the other side a hillock. Gavin reached the scene to see the soldiers marching down the brae, guarding a small body of policemen. The armed weavers were retreating before them. 100 women or more were on the hillock, shrieking and gesticulating. Gavin joined them, calling on them not to fling the stones they had begun to gather. The armed men broke into a rabble, flung down their weapons, and fled back toward the town house. Here they almost ran against the soldiers in the square, who again forced them into the brae. Finding themselves about to be wedged between the two forces, some crawled through the hedge, where they were instantly seized by policemen. Others sought to climb up the hillock and then escape into the country. The policemen clamoured after them. The men were too frightened to fight, but a woman seized a policeman by the waist and flung him head foremost among the soldiers. One of these shouted "Fire!" but the captain cried "No!" Then came showers of missiles from the women. They stood their ground and defended the retreat of scared men. Who flung the first stone is not known, but it is believed to have been the Egyptian. The policemen were recalled, and the whole body ordered to advance down the brae. Thus the weavers, who had not escaped at once, were driven before them, and soon hemmed in between the two bodies of soldiers, when they were easily captured. But for 2 minutes there was a thick shower of stones and clods of earth. It was ever afterwards painful to Gavin to recall this scene, but less on account of the shower of stones than because of the flight of one divot in it. He had been watching the handsome young captain, Halliwell, riding with his men, admiring him too for his coolness. This coolness exasperated the gypsy, who twice flung at Halliwell and missed him. He rode on, smiling contemptuously. "Oh, if I could only fling straight," the Egyptian moaned. Then she saw the minister by her side, and in the tick of a clock something happened that can never be explained. For the moment Gavin was so lost in misery over the probable effect of the night's rioting that he had forgotten where he was. Suddenly the Egyptian's beautiful face was close to his, and she pressed a divot into his hand, at the same time pointing at the officer and whispering, "Hit him." Gavin flung the clod of earth and hit Halliwell on the head. I say I cannot explain this. I tell what happened, and add with thankfulness that only the Egyptian witnessed the deed. Gavin, I suppose, had flung the divot before he could stay his hand. Then he shrank in horror. "Woman!" he cried again. "You are a dear," said she, and vanished. By the time Gavin was breathing freely again, the lockup was crammed with prisoners, and the riot act had been read from the town house stair. It is still remembered that the Baron Bailie, to whom this duty fell, had got no further than "Victoria by the grace of God," when the paper was struck out of his hands. When a stirring event occurs up here, we smack our lips over it for months, and so I could still write a history of that memorable night in Thrums. I could tell how the doctor, a man whose shoulders often looked as if they had been caught in a shower of tobacco ash, brought me the news to the schoolhouse, and now when I crossed the fields to Dumfounder Waster Lunny with it, I found Birse, the post, reeling off the story to him as fast as a fisher could let out line. I know who was the first woman on the Marrywell Brae to hear the horn, and how she woke her husband, and who heard it first at the Dunhead and the Tenements, with what they immediately said and did. I had from Dite Dutcher's own lips the curious story of his sleeping placidly through the whole disturbance, and on wakening in the morning yoking to his loom as usual, and also his statement that such ill luck was enough to shake a man's faith in religion. The police had knowledge that enabled them to go straight to the houses of the weavers wanted, but they sometimes brought away the wrong man, for such of the people as did not escape from the town had swapped houses for the night, a trick that served them better than all our drilling on the hill. Old Yule's son escaped by burying himself in a peat rick, and Snecky Hobart by pretending that he was a sack of potatoes. Less fortunate was Sanders Webster, the mole catcher already mentioned. Sanders was really an innocent man. He had not even been in Thrums on the night of the rising against the manufacturers, but thinking that the outbreak was to be left unpunished, he wanted his share in the glory of it. So he had boasted of being a ringleader until many believed him, including the authorities. His braggadocio undid him. He was run to earth in a pigsty and got 9 months. With the other arrests I need not concern myself, for they have no part in the story of the little minister. While Gavin was with the families whose breadwinners were now in the lockup, a cell that was usually crammed on fair nights and empty for the rest of the year, the sheriff and Halliwell were in the round room of the townhouse, not in good temper. They spoke loudly, and some of their words sank into the cell below. "The whole thing has been a fiasco," the sheriff was heard saying, "owing to our failing to take them by surprise. Why, 3/4 of those taken will have to be liberated, and we have to let the worst offenders slip through our hands." "Well," answered Halliwell, who was wearing a heavy cloak, "I have brought your policemen into the place, and that is all I undertook to do." "You brought them, but at the expense of alarming the countryside. I wish we had come without you." "Nonsense. My men advanced like ghosts. Could your police have come down that brae alone tonight?" "Yes, because it would have been deserted. Your soldiers, I tell you, have done the mischief. This woman, who so many of our prisoners admit brought the news of our coming, must either have got it from one of your men or have seen them on the march." "The men did not know their destination. True, she might have seen us despite our precautions, but you forget that she told them how we were to act in the event of our being seen. That is what perplexes me." "Yes, and me too, for it was a close secret between you and me and Lord Rintoul, and not a half a dozen others." "Well, find the woman, and we shall get the explanation. If she is still in town she cannot escape, for my men are everywhere." "She was seen 10 minutes ago." "Then she is ours. I say, Rick, if I were you I would set all my prisoners free and take away a cartload of their wives instead. I have only seen the backs of the men of Thrums, but on my word I very nearly ran away from the women. Hallo, I believe one of your police has caught our virago single-handed." So Halliwell exclaimed, hearing someone shout, "This is the rascal." But it was not the Egyptian who was then thrust into the round room. It was John Dunwoody, looking very sly. Probably there was not, even in Thrums, a cannier man than Dunwoody. His religious views were those of Cruikshank's, but he went regularly to church. "On the off chance of there being a God after all, so I'm safe, whatever side may be wrong." "This is the man," explained a policeman, "who brought the alarm. He admits himself having been in Tilliedrum just before we started." "Your name, my man?" the sheriff demanded. "It micht be John Dunwoody," the tinsmith answered cautiously. "But is it?" "I dinna say it's no." "You were in Tilliedrum this evening?" "I micht hae been." "Were you?" "I'll swear to nothing." "Why not?" "Because I'm a canny man." "Into the cell with him," Halliwell cried, losing patience. "Leave him to me," said the sheriff. "I understand the sort of man. Now, Dunwoody, what were you doing in Tilliedrum?" "I was taking my laddie down to be prenticed to a writer there," answered Dunwoody, fallen into the sheriff's net. "What are you yourself?" "I micht be a tinsmith to trade." "And you, a mere tinsmith, dare to tell me that a lawyer was willing to take your son into his office? Be cautious, Dunwoody." "Weel, then, the laddie's highly edicated and I high siller, and that's how the writer was to take him and make a gentleman of him." "I learned from the neighbours," the policeman explained, "that this is partly true, but what makes us suspect him is this. He left the laddie at Tilliedrum, and yet when he came home the first person he sees at the fireside is the laddie himself." The laddie had run home, and the reason plainly was that he had heard of our preparations and wanted to alarm the town. "There seems something in this, Dunwoody," the sheriff said, "and if you cannot explain it I must keep you in custody." "I'll make a clean breast o't," Dunwoody replied, seeing that in this matter truth was best. "The laddie was terrible against being made a gentleman, and when he saw the kind of life he would hae to lead, clean hands, clean dickies, and no gutters on his breeks, his heart took mair scunner at genteelity than ever, and he ran hame. Ay, I was mad when I saw him at the fireside, but he says to me, 'How would you like to be a gentleman yourself, father?' he says, and that so affected me, I'm to gie him his ain way." Another prisoner, Dave Langlands, was confronted with Dunwoody. "John Dunwoody's as innocent as I am myself," Dave said, "and I'm most meekly innocent. It was not John, but the Egyptian that gave the alarm. I tell you what, sheriff, if it'll make me innocenter like, I'll picture the Egyptian to you just as I saw her, and syne you'll be able to catch her easier." "You are an honest fellow," said the sheriff. "Oh, I only wish I had the whipping of him," growled Halliwell, who was of a generous nature. "For what business had she?" continued Dave righteously, to meddle in other folks' business. She's no a Thrums lassie, and so I say let the law take its course on her." "Will you listen to such a cur, Rick?" asked Halliwell. "Certainly. Speak out, Langlands." "Weel, then, I was in the windmill the nicht." "You were a watcher?" "I happened to be in a windmill wi' another man," Dave went on, avoiding the officer's question. "What was his name?" demanded Halliwell. "It was the Egyptian I was to tell you about," Dave said, looking to the sheriff. "Ah, yes, you only tell tales about women," said Halliwell. "Strange women," corrected Dave. "Weel, we was there, and it would maybe be 12 o'clock, and we was speaking but about lawful things, when we heard someone running yont the road. I keeked through a hole in the door, and I saw it was an Egyptian lassie that I had never clapped een on before. She saw the licht in the window, and she cried, 'Hi, you billies in the windmill, the sojers is coming.' I fell in a fricht, but the other man opened the door, and again she cries, 'The sojers is coming. Quick, or you'll be ta'en.' At that the other man up and wi' his bonnet and ran, but I didna make off so smart." "You had to pick yourself up first?" suggested the officer. "Sal, it was the lassie picked me up. Ay, and she picked up a horn at the same time. 'Blaw on that,' she cried, 'and alarm the town.' But, sheriff, I didna do it. Na, I had ower muckle respect for the law." "In other words," said Halliwell, "you also bolted and left the gypsy to blow the horn herself." "I dinna deny but what I made my feet my friend, but it wasna her that blew the horn. I ken that, for I looked back and saw her trying to do it, but she couldna. She didna ken the way." "Then who did blow it?" "The first man she met, I suppose. We kent that the horn was to be signal, except Weary He's police, so we kept the thrying." "Is that all you saw of the woman?" "Ay, for I ran straucht to my garret, and there your men took me. Can I gae hame now, sheriff?" "No, you cannot. Describe the woman's appearance." "She had a heap o' rowan berries stuck in her hair, and I think she had on a green wrapper and a red shawl. She had a most extraordinary face. I canna exact describe it, for she would be lauching one second and syne solemn the next. I tell you, her face changed as quick as you could turn the page o' a book. Ay, here comes Weir to speak up for me." Weir entered cheerfully. "This is the local policeman," a Tilliedrum officer said. "We have been searching for him everywhere, and only found him now." "Where have you been?" asked the sheriff wrathfully. "Where most honest men is at this hour," replied Weary. "In my bed." "How dare you ignore your duty at such a time?" "It's a long story," the policeman answered pleasantly, in anticipation of a talk at last. "Answer me in a word." "In a word!" cried the policeman, quite crestfallen. "It canna be done. You'll need to cross examine me too. Is my lawful richt?" "I'll take you to the Tilliedrum gaol for your share in this night's work if you do not speak to the purpose. Why did you not hasten to our assistance?" "As sure as death I never kent you was here. I was up the Roods on my rounds when I heard an awful din down in the square, and thinks I, there's rough characters about, and the place for honest folk is their bed. So to my bed I gaed, and I was in't when your men gripped me." "We must see into this before we leave. In the meantime you will act as a guide to my searchers. Stop. Do you know anything of this Egyptian?" "What Egyptian? Is it the lassie with rowans in her hair?" "The same. Have you seen her?" "That I have. There's nothing agin her, is there? Whatever it is, I'll uphold she didna do it, for a simpler, franker spoken crittur couldna be." "Never mind what I want her for. When did you see her?" "It would be about 12 o'clock," began Weary unctuously, "when I was in the Roods. Ay, no lang afore I heard the disturbance in the square. I was standing in the middle of the road, wondering how the door of the windmill was swinging open, when she came up to me. 'A fine nicht for the time of year,' I says to her, for nobody but the minister had spoken to me a day. 'A very fine nicht,' says she, very frank, though she was breathing quick like, as if she had been running. 'You'll be police?' says she. 'I am,' says I, 'and what be you?' 'I'm just a poor gypsy lassie,' says she. 'And what's that in your hand?' says I. 'It's a horn I found in the wood,' says she, 'but it's rusty and winna blaw.' I laughed at her ignorance, and says I warrant I can blow it. I dinna believe you, she says. Gie me haud o't, says I, and she gae it to me, and I blew some bonny blasts on't. And you see she didna ken the way it. Thank you kindly, says she, and she ran away without even minding to take the horn back again. You incredible idiot, cried the sheriff. Then it was you who gave the alarm? What hae I done to madden you? Honest Weary asked in perplexity. Get out of my sight, sir, roared the sheriff. But the captain laughed. I like your doughty policeman, Richt, he said. Hi, obliged friend. Let us hear how this gypsy struck you. How was she dressed? She was snod, but no unca snod, replied Weary stiffly. I don't understand you. I mean she was couthie, but no siren order. What on earth is that? Weel, a tasty stocky, but gay ora put on. What language are you speaking, you enigma? I'm saying she was naturally a bonny bit kimmer rather than happy up to the nines. Oh, go away, cried Halliwell, whereupon Weary descended the stair haughtily, declaring that the sheriff was an unreasonable man, and that he was a queer captain who did not understand the English language. Can I gae home now, sheriff? asked Langlands hopefully. Take this fellow back to his cell, Rick directed shortly, and whatever else you do, see that you capture this woman. Halliwell, I'm going out to look for her myself. Confound it, what are you laughing at? At the way this vixen has slipped through your fingers. Not quite that, sir, not quite that. She is in Thrums still, and I swear I'll have her before day breaks. See to it, Halliwell, that if she is brought here in my absence, she does not slip through your fingers. If she is brought here, said Halliwell, mocking him, you must return and protect me. It would be cruelty to leave a poor soldier in the hands of a woman of Thrums. She is not a Thrums woman. You have been told so a dozen times. Then I am not afraid. In the round room, which is oblong, there is a throne on which the bailie sits when he dispenses justice. It is swathed in red cloth that give it the appearance of a pulpit. Left to himself, Halliwell flung off his cloak, and taking a chair near this dais, rested his legs on the bare wooden table, one on each side of the lamp. He was still in this position when the door opened, and two policemen thrust the Egyptian into the room. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 7 has the folly of looking into a woman's eyes by way of text. This is the woman, Captain, one of the policemen said in triumph. And begging your pardon, will you keep a grip of her till the sheriff comes back? Halliwell did not turn his head. You can leave her here, he said carelessly. 3 of us are not needed to guard a woman. But she's a slippery customer. You can go, said Halliwell, and the policemen withdrew slowly, eyeing their prisoner doubtfully until the door closed. Then the officer wheeled around languidly, expecting to find the Egyptian gaunt and muscular. Now then, he drawled. Why, by Jove! The gallant soldier was as much taken aback as if he had turned to find a pistol at his ear. He took his feet off the table, yet he only saw the gypsy's girlish figure in its red and green, for she had covered her face with her hands. She was looking at him intently between her fingers, but he did not know this. All he did want to know just then was what was behind the hands. Before he spoke again, she had perhaps made up her mind about him, for she began to sob bitterly. At the same time she slipped a finger over her ring. Why don't you look at me? Asked Halliwell, selfishly. I daurna. Am I so fearsome? You're a soldier, and you would shoot me like a craw. Halliwell laughed, and taking her wrists in his hands, uncovered her face. Oh, by Jove, he said again, but this time to himself. As for the Egyptian, she slid the ring into her pocket and fell back before the officer's magnificence. Oh, she cried, is all soldiers like you? There was such admiration in her eyes that it would have been self-contempt to doubt her. Yet having smiled complacently, Halliwell became uneasy. "Who on earth are you?" he asked, finding it wise not to look her in the face. "Why do you not answer me more quickly?" "Dinna be angry at that, Captain," the Egyptian implored. "I promised my mither aye to count 20 afore I spoke, because she thocht I was ower glib. Captain, how is it that you're so fleid to look at me?" Thus put on his mettle, Halliwell again faced her, with the result that his question changed to, "Where did you get those eyes?" Then he was indignant with himself. "What I want to know," he explained severely, "is how were you able to acquaint the Thrums people with our movements? That you must tell me at once, for the sheriff blames my soldiers. Come now, no counting 20." He was pacing the room now, and she had her face to herself. It said several things, among them that the officer evidently did not like this charge against his men. "Does the sheriff blame the soldiers?" exclaimed this quick-witted Egyptian. "Weel, that cows, for he has nane to blame but himself." "What?" cried Halliwell, delighted. "It was the sheriff who told tales? Answer me. You are counting 100 this time." Perhaps the gypsy had two reasons for withholding her answer. If so, one of them was as the sheriff had told nothing, she had a story to make up. The other was that she wanted to strike a bargain with the officer. "If I tell you," she said eagerly, "will you set me free?" "I may ask the sheriff to do so." "But he mauna see me," the Egyptian said in distress. "There's reasons, Captain." "Why, surely you have not been before him on other occasions," said Halliwell, surprised. "No in the way you mean," muttered the gypsy, and for the moment her eyes twinkled. But the light in them went out when she remembered that the sheriff was near, and she looked desperately at the window as if ready to fling herself from it. She had very good reasons for not wishing to be seen by Rick, though fear that he would put her in gaol was not one of them. Halliwell thought it was the one cause of her woe, and great was his desire to turn the tables on the sheriff. "Tell me the truth," he said, "and I promise to befriend you." "Weel, then," the gypsy said, hoping still to soften his heart, and making up her story as she told it. "Yestreen I met the sheriff, and he telled me all I hae telled the Thrums folk this nicht." "You can scarcely expect me to believe that. Where did you meet him?" "In Glen Quharity. He was riding on a horse." "Well, I allow he was there yesterday, and on horseback. He was on his way back to Tilliedrum from Lord Rintoul's place. But don't tell me that he took a gypsy girl into his confidence." "Ay, he did, without kenning. He was gieing his horse a drink when I met him, and he let me tell him his fortune. He said he would gaol me for an impostor if I didna tell him true, so I gaed about it cautiously, and after a minute or twa I telled him he was coming to Thrums the nicht to nab the rioters." "You are trifling with me," interposed the indignant soldier. "You promised to tell me not what you said to the sheriff, but how he disclosed our movements to you." "And that's just what I'm telling you, only you hinna the rummel gumption to see it. How do you think fortunes is telled? First we get out of the man without his seeing what we're after, about himself, and syne we repeat it to him. That's what I did with the sheriff." "You drew the whole thing out of him without his knowing?" "Deed I did, and he rode awa, saying I was a witch." The soldier heard with the delight of a schoolboy. "Now, if the sheriff does not liberate you at my request," he said, "I will never let him hear the end of this story. He was right. You are a witch. You deceived the sheriff. Yes, undoubtedly you are a witch." He looked at her with fun in his face, but the fun disappeared, and a wondering admiration took its place. "By Jove," he said, "I don't wonder you bewitched the sheriff. I must take care or you will bewitch the captain too." At this notion he smiled, but he also ceased looking at her. Suddenly the Egyptian again began to cry. "You're angry with me," she sobbed. "I wish I had never set in on you." "Why do you wish that?" Halliwell asked. "Fine you ken," she answered, and again covered her face with her hands. He looked at her undecidedly. "I am not angry with you," he said gently. "You are an extraordinary girl." Had he really made a conquest of this beautiful creature? Her words said so, but had he? The captain could not make up his mind. He gnawed his moustache in doubt. There was silence, save for the Egyptian's sobs. Halliwell's heart was touched, and he drew nearer her. My poor girl. He stopped. Was she crying? Was she not laughing at him, rather? He became red. The gypsy peeped at him between her fingers and saw that he was of two minds. She let her hands fall from her face, and undoubtedly there were tears on her cheeks. "If you're no angry with me," she said sadly, "how will you no look at me?" "I'm looking at you now." He was very close to her and staring into her wonderful eyes. I am older than the captain, and those eyes have dazzled me. "Captain, dear." She put her hands in his. His chest rose. He knew she was seeking to beguile him, but he could not take his eyes off of hers. He was in a worse plight than a woman listening to the first whisper of love. Now she was further from him, but the spell held. She reached the door without taking her eyes from his face. For several seconds he had been a man mesmerized. Just in time he came to. It was when she turned from him to find the handle of the door. She was turning it when his hand fell on hers so suddenly that she screamed. He twisted her round. "Sit down there," he said hoarsely, pointing to the chair upon which he had flung his cloak. She dared not disobey. Then he leant against the door, his back to her, for just then he wanted no one to see his face. The gypsy sat very still and a little frightened. Halliwell opened the door presently and called to the soldier on duty below. "Davidson, see if you can find the sheriff. I want him." "And Davidson?" The captain paused.
Yes,
he muttered, and the old soldier marvelled at his words. "It is better. Davidson, lock this door on the outside." Davidson did as he was ordered, and again the Egyptian was left alone with Halliwell. "Afraid of a woman?" she said contemptuously, though her heart sank when she heard the key turn in the lock. "I admit it," he answered calmly. He walked up and down the room, and she sat silently watching him. "That story of yours about the sheriff was not true," he said at last. "I suspect it wasna," answered the Egyptian coolly. "Hae you been thinking about it this time? Captain, I could tell you what you're thinking now. You're wishing it had been true, so that the ane o' you couldna lauch at the other." "Silence!" said the captain, and not another word would he speak until he heard the sheriff coming up the stair. The Egyptian trembled at his step and rose in desperation. "Why is the door locked?" cried the sheriff, shaking it. "All right," answered Halliwell. "The key is on your side." At that moment the Egyptian knocked the lamp off the table, and the room was at once in darkness. The officer sprang at her, and catching her by the skirt, held on. "Why are you in darkness?" asked the sheriff as he entered. "Shut the door," cried Halliwell. "Put your back to it." "Don't tell me the woman has escaped." "I have her. I have her. She capsized the lamp, the little jade. Shut the door." Still keeping firm hold of her, as he thought, the captain relit the lamp with his other hand. It showed an extraordinary scene. The door was shut, and the sheriff was guarding it. Halliwell was clutching the cloth of the bailie's seat. There was no Egyptian. A moment passed before either man found his tongue. "Open the door after her," cried Halliwell, but the door would not open. The Egyptian had fled and locked it behind her. What the two men said to each other it would not be fitting to tell. When Davidson, who had been gossiping at the corner of the town house, released his captain and the sheriff, the gypsy had been gone for some minutes. "But she shan't escape us," Rick cried, and hastened out to assist in the pursuit. Halliwell was in such a furious temper that he called up Davidson and admonished him for neglect of duty. End of chapter 7, recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 8 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 8. 3 a.m. Monstrous audacity of the woman. Not till the stroke of 3 did Gavin turn homeward with the legs of a ploughman and eyes rebelling against overwork. Seeking to comfort his dejected people, whose courage lay split on the brae, he had been in as many houses as the policemen. The soldiers, marching through the wynds, came frequently upon him, and found it hard to believe that he was always the same one. They told afterwards that Thrums was remarkable for the ferocity of its women and the number of its little ministers. The morning was nipping cold, and the streets were deserted, for the people had been ordered within doors. As he crossed the Roods, Gavin saw a gleam of redcoats. In the back wynd he heard a bugle blow. A stir in the banker's close spoke of another seizure. At the top of the school wynd, two policemen, of whom one was Weary, stopped the minister with a flash of a lantern. "We daurdna let you pass, sir," the Tilliedrum man said, "without a good look at you. That's the orders." "I hereby swear," said Weary authoritatively, "that this is no Egyptian. Signed, Peter Spens, policeman, called by the vulgar Weary. Mr. Dishart, you can pass, unless you'll bide a wee and gie us your crack." "You have not found the gypsy, then?" Gavin asked. "No," the other policeman said, "but we ken she's within cry of this very spot, and escape she canna." "What mortal man can do," Weary said, "we're doing. Ay, and mair. She's auld wicht, and may find Bilby in queer places. Mr. Dishart, my official opinion is that this Egyptian is fearsomely like my snuff spoon. I've kent me drap that spoon on the fender, and be beat to find it in an hour, and yet at a time I was sure was there. This is a gey mysterious world, and women's the uncanniest things in it. It's hardly most to think how uncanny they are." "This one deserves to be punished," Gavin said firmly. "She incited the people to riot." "She did," agreed Weary, who was supping ravenously on sociability. "Ay, she even tried her tricks on me, so that them that kens no better thinks she fooled me. But she's cracky. And as for her being a cuttie, you've said yourself, Mr. Dishart, that we're all desperately wicked. But we're sair tried. Has it ever struck you that the trout bites best on the Sabbath? God's critters tempting decent men." "Come along," cried the Tilliedrum man impatiently. "I'm coming, but I maun give Mr. Dishart permission to pass first." "Hae you heard, Mr. Dishart," Weary whispered, "that the Egyptian diddled baith the captain and the shirra? It's my official opinion that she's no better than a roasted onion, the which, if you grip it firm, jumps out o' sicht, leaving its coat in your fingers. Mr. Dishart, you can pass." The policeman turned down the school wynd, and Gavin, who had already heard exaggerated accounts of the strange woman's escape from the town house, proceeded along the tenements. He walked in the black shadows of the houses, though across the way there was the morning light. In talking of the gypsy, the little minister had, as it were, put on the black cap, but now, even though he shook his head angrily with every thought of her, the scene in Windyghoul glimmered before his eyes. Sometimes, when he meant to frown, he only sighed, and then, having sighed, he shook himself. He was unpleasantly conscious of his right hand, which had flung the divot. Oh, she was shameless, and it would be a bright day for Thrums that saw the last of her. He hoped the policeman would succeed in It was the gladsomeness of innocence that he had seen dancing in the moonlight. A mere woman could not be like that. How soft. And she had derided him. He, the auld licht minister of Thrums, had been flouted before his people by a hussy. She was without reverence. She knew no difference between an auld licht minister, whose duty it was to speak and hers to listen, and herself. This woman deserved to be. And the look she cast behind her as she danced and sang. It was sweet, so wistful. The presence of purity had silenced him. Purity? Who had made him fling that divot? He would think no more of her. Let it suffice that he knew what she was. He would put her from his thoughts. Was it a ring on her finger? 50 yards in front of him, Gavin saw the road end in a wall of soldiers. They were between him and the manse, and he was still in darkness. No sound reached him save the echo of his own feet. But was it an echo? He stopped and turned round sharply. Now he heard nothing. He saw nothing. Yet was not that a human figure standing motionless in the shadows behind? He walked on, and again heard the sound. Again he looked behind, but this time without stopping. The figure was following him. He stopped. So did it. He turned back, but it did not move. It was the Egyptian. Gavin knew her, despite the lane of darkness, despite the long cloak that now concealed even her feet, despite the hood over her head. She was looking quite respectable, but he knew her. He neither advanced to her nor retreated. Could the unhappy girl not see that she was walking into the arms of the soldiers? But doubtless she had been driven from all her hiding places. For a moment Gavin had it in his heart to warn her, but it was only for a moment. The next a sudden horror shot through him. She was stealing toward him, so softly that he had not seen her start. The woman had designs on him. Gavin turned from her. He walked so quickly that judges would have said he ran. The soldiers, I have said, stood in the dim light. Gavin had almost reached them when a little hand touched his arm. "Stop!" cried the sergeant, hearing someone approaching, and then Gavin stepped out of the darkness with the gypsy on his arm. "Is it you, Mr. Dishart?" said the sergeant. "And your lady?" "I," said Gavin. His lady pinched his arm. "Yes," she answered, in an elegant English voice that made Gavin stare at her. "But indeed, I'm sorry I ventured into the streets tonight. I thought I might be able to comfort some of these unhappy people, Captain, but I could do little, sadly little." "It is no scene for a lady, ma'am, but your husband has Did you speak, Mr. Dishart?" "Yes, I must inform—" "My dear," said the Egyptian, "I quite agree with you, so we need not detain the captain." "I'm only a sergeant, ma'am." "Indeed," said the Egyptian, raising her pretty eyebrows. "And how long are you to remain in Thrums, sergeant?" "Only for a few hours, Mrs. Dishart. If this gypsy lassie had not given us so much trouble, we might have been gone by now." "Ah, yes. I hope you will catch her, sergeant." "Sergeant," said Gavin, firmly, "I must—" "Oh, you must indeed, dear," said the Egyptian, "for you are sadly tired. Good night, sergeant." "Your servant, Mrs. Dishart." "Your servant, sir." "But—" cried Gavin. "Come, love," said the Egyptian, and she walked the distracted minister through the soldiers and up the manse road. The soldiers left behind, Gavin flung her arm from him, and standing still, shook his fist in her face. You woman," he said. This, I think, was the last time he called her a woman. But she was clapping her hands merrily. "It was beautiful," she exclaimed. "It was iniquitous," he answered, "and I a minister." "You can't help that," said the Egyptian, who pitied all ministers heartily. "No," Gavin said, misunderstanding her, "I could not help it. No blame attaches to me." "I meant that you could not help being a minister. You could have helped saving me, and I thank you so much." "Do not dare to thank me. I forbid you to say that I saved you. I did my best to hand you over to the authorities." "Then why did you not hand me over?" Gavin groaned. "All you had to say," continued the merciless Egyptian, "was, 'This is the person you are in search of.' I did not have my hand over your mouth. Why did you not say it?" "Forbear," said Gavin, woefully. "It must have been," the gypsy said, "because you really wanted to help me." "Then it was against my better judgment," said Gavin. "I'm glad of that," said the gypsy. "Mr. Dishart, I do believe you like me all the time." "Can a man like a woman against his will?" Gavin blurted out. "Well, of course he can," said the Egyptian, speaking as one who knew. "That is the very nicest way to be liked." Seeing how agitated Gavin was, remorse filled her, and she said in a wheedling voice, "It's all over, and no one will know." Passion sat on the minister's brow, but he said nothing, for the gypsy's face had changed with her voice, and the audacious woman was become a child. "I'm very sorry," she said, as if he had caught her stealing jam. The hood had fallen back, and she looked pleadingly at him. She had the appearance of one who was entirely in his hands. There was a torrent of words in Gavin, but only these trickled forth. "I don't understand you." "You are not angry any more?" pleaded the Egyptian. "Angry!" he cried, with the righteous rage of one who, when his leg is being sawn off, is asked gently if it hurts him. "Ah, I know you are," she sighed, and the sigh meant that men are strange. "Have you no respect for law and order?" demanded Gavin. Not much, she answered honestly. He looked down the road to where the redcoats were still visible, and his face became hard. She read his thoughts. No, she said, becoming a woman again. It is not yet too late. Why don't you shout to them? She was holding herself like a queen, but there was no stiffness in her. They might have been a pair of lovers, and she the wronged one. Again she looked timidly at him, and became beautiful in a new way. Her eyes said that he was very cruel, and she was only keeping back her tears till he had gone. More dangerous than her face was her manner, which gave Gavin the privilege of making her unhappy. It permitted him to argue with her. It never implied that though he raged at her he must stand afar off. It called him a bully, but did not end the conversation. Now, but perhaps I should not tell this, unless she is his wife, a man is shot with a thrill of exultation every time a pretty woman allows him to upbraid her. I do not understand you, Gavin repeated weakly, and the gypsy bent her head under this terrible charge. Only a few hours ago, he continued, you were a gypsy girl in a fantastic dress, barefooted. The Egyptian's bare feet at once peeped out mischievously from beneath the cloak, and then again retired into hiding. You spoke as broadly, complained the minister, somewhat taken aback by this apparition, as any woman in Thrums, and now you fling a cloak over your shoulders and immediately become a fine lady. Who are you? Perhaps, answered the Egyptian, it is the cloak that has bewitched me. She slipped out of it. Ay, oh losh, she said, as if surprised. It was just a cloak that did it, for now I'm a pure ignorant bit lassie again, my certie, but class does make a differ to a woman. This was sheer levity, and Gavin walked scornfully away from it. Yet, if you will not tell me who you are, he said, looking over his shoulder, tell me where you got the cloak. Na fegs, replied the gypsy out of the cloak. Really, Mr. Dishart, you had better not ask, she added, replacing it over her. She followed him, meaning to gain the open by the fields to the north of the manse. Goodbye, she said, holding out her hand, if you are not to give me up. I am not a policeman, replied Gavin, but he would not take her hand. Surely we part friends then, said the Egyptian sweetly. No, Gavin answered. I hope never to see your face again. I cannot help, the Egyptian said with dignity, your not liking my face. Then with less dignity she added, there is a splotch of mud on your own, little minister. It came off the divot you flung at the captain. With this parting shot she tripped past him, and Gavin would not let his eyes follow her. It was not the mud on his face that distressed him, nor even the hand that had flung the divot. It was the word little. Though even Margaret was not aware of it, Gavin's shortness had grieved him all his life. There had been times when he tried to keep the secret from himself. In his boyhood he had sought a remedy by getting his larger comrades to stretch him. In the company of tall men he was always self-conscious. In the pulpit he looked darkly at his congregation when he asked them who, by taking thought, could add a cubit to his stature. When standing on a hearthrug his heels were frequently on the fender. In his bedroom he has stood on a footstool and surveyed himself in the mirror. Once he fastened high heels to his boots, being ashamed to ask Hendry Munn to do it for him. But this dishonesty shamed him, and he tore them off. So the Egyptian had put a needle into his pride, and he walked to the manse gloomily. Margaret was at her window, looking for him, and he saw her, though she did not see him. He was stepping into the middle of the road to wave his hand to her, when some sudden weakness made him look towards the fields instead. The Egyptian saw him and nodded thanks for his interest in her, but he scowled and pretended to be studying the sky. Next moment he saw her running back to him. There are soldiers at the top of the field, she cried. I cannot escape that way. There is no other way, Gavin answered. Will you not help me again? She entreated. She should not have said again. Gavin shook his head, but pulled her closer to the manse dyke, for his mother was still in sight. Why do you do that? The girl asked quickly, looking round to see if she were pursued. Oh, I see, she said, as her eyes fell on the figure at the window. It is my mother, Gavin said, though he need not have explained, unless he wanted the gypsy to know that he was a bachelor. Only your mother? Only. Let me tell you, she may suffer more than you for your behaviour tonight. How can she? If you are caught, will it not be discovered that I helped you to escape?" "But you said you did not." "Yes, I helped you," Gavin admitted. "My God, what would my congregation say if they knew I had let you pass yourself off as my wife?" He struck his brow, and the Egyptian had the propriety to blush. "It is not a punishment from men I am afraid of," Gavin said, bitterly, "but from my conscience. No, that is not true. I do fear exposure, but for my mother's sake. Look at her. She's happy because she thinks me good and true. She has had such trials as you cannot know of, and now, when at last I seemed able to do something for her, you destroy her happiness. You have her life in your hands." The Egyptian turned her back upon him, and one of her feet tapped angrily on the dry ground. Then, child of impulse as she always was, she flashed an indignant glance at him and walked quickly down the road. "Where are you going?" he cried. "To give myself up. You need not be alarmed. I will clear you." There was not a shake in her voice, and she spoke without looking back. "Stop!" Gavin called, but she would not, until his hand touched her shoulder. "What do you want?" she asked. "Why," whispered Gavin, giddily, "why do you not hide in the manse garden? No one will look for you there." There was genuine tears in the gypsy's eyes now. "You are a good man," she said. "I like you." "Don't say that," Gavin cried in horror. "There is a summer seat in the garden." Then he hurried from her, and without looking to see if she took his advice, hastened to the manse. Once inside, he snibbed the door. End of chapter 8. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 9 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.N. Barrie. Chapter 9. The Woman Considered in Absence. The Adventures of a Military Cloak. About 6 o'clock, Margaret sat up suddenly in bed, with the conviction that she had slept in. To her this was to ravel the day, a dire thing. The last time it happened, Gavin, softened by her distress, had condensed the morning worship into a sentence that she might make up on the clock. Her part on waking was merely to ring her bell, and so rouse Jean, for Margaret had given Gavin a promise to breakfast in bed, and remain there till her fire was lit. Accustomed all her life, however, to early rising, her feet were usually on the floor before she remembered her vow, and then it was but a step to the window to survey the morning. To Margaret, who seldom went out, the weather was not of great moment, while it mattered much to Gavin. Yet she always thought of it first thing, and he not at all until he had to decide whether his companion should be an umbrella or a staff. On this morning, Margaret only noticed that there had been rain since Gavin came in. Forgetting that the water obscuring the outlook was on the other side of the panes, she tried to brush it away with her fist. It was of the soldiers she was thinking. They might have been awaiting her appearance at the window as their signal to depart, for hardly had she raised the blind when they began their march out of Thrums. From the manse she could not see them, but she heard them, and she saw some people at the Tenements run to their houses at the sound of the drum. Other persons, less timid, followed the enemy with execrations halfway to Tilladrum. Margaret, the only person, as it happened, then awake in the manse, stood listening for some time. In the summer seat of the garden, however, there was another listener, protected from her sight by thin spars. Despite the lateness of the hour, Margaret was too soft-hearted to rouse Jean, who had lain down in her clothes, trembling for her father. She went instead into Gavin's room to look admiringly at him as he slept. Often Gavin woke to find that his mother had slipped in to save him the enormous trouble of opening a drawer for a clean collar, or of pouring the water into the basin with his own hand. Sometimes he caught her in the act of putting thick socks in the place of thin ones, and it must be admitted that her passion for keeping his belongings in boxes, and the boxes in secret places, and the secret places at the back of drawers, occasionally led to their being lost when wanted. "They are safe at any rate, for I put them away some gate," was then Margaret's comfort, but less soothing to Gavin. Yet if he upbraided her in his hurry, it was to repent bitterly his temper the next instant, and to feel its effects more than she, temper being a weapon that we hold by the blade. When he awoke and saw her in his room, he would pretend, unless he felt called upon to rage at her for self-neglect, to be still asleep, and then be filled with tenderness for her. A great writer has spoken sadly of the shock it would be to a mother to know her boy as he really is, but I think she often knows him better than he is known to cynical friends. We should be slower to think that the man at his worst is the real man, and certain that the better we are ourselves, the less likely is he to be at his worst in our company. Every time he talks away his own character before us, he is signifying contempt for ours. On this morning, Margaret only opened Gavin's door to stand and look, for she was fearful of awakening him after his heavy night. Even before she saw that he still slept, she noticed with surprise that, for the first time since he came to Thrums, he had put on his shutters. She concluded that he had done this lest the light should rouse him. He was not sleeping pleasantly, for now he put his open hand before his face as if to guard himself, and again he frowned and seemed to draw back from something. He pointed his finger sternly to the north, ordering the weavers, his mother thought, to return to their homes, and then he muttered to himself so that she heard the words, "And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." Then suddenly he bent forward, his eyes opened and fixed on the window. Thus he sat for the space of half a minute, like one listening with painful intentness. When he lay back, Margaret slipped away. She knew he was living the night over again, but not of the divot his right hand had cast, nor of the woman in the garden. Gavin was roused presently by the sound of voices from Margaret's room, where Jean, who had now gathered much news, was giving it to her mistress. Jean's cheerfulness would have told him that her father was safe had he not wakened to the thoughts of the Egyptian. I suppose he was at the window in an instant, unsnibbing the shutters and looking out as cautiously as a burglar might have looked in. The Egyptian was gone from the summer seat. He drew a great breath. But his troubles were not over. He had just lifted his ewer of water when these words from the kitchen capsized it. "Ay, an Egyptian. That's what the auld folk call a gypsy. Weel, Mrs. Dishart, she led the police and soldiers sic a dance through Thrums as would baffle description, though I kent the fits and fours o't as I dinna. Ay, but they gripped her in the end, and the queer thing is—" Gavin listened to no more. He suddenly sat down. The queer thing, of course, was that she had been caught in his garden. Yes, and doubtless queerer things about this hussy and her husband were being bawled from door to door. To the girl's probable sufferings he gave no heed. What kind of a man had he been a few hours ago to yield to the machinations of a woman who was so obviously the devil? Now he saw his folly in the face. The tray in Jean's hands clattered against the dresser, and Gavin sprang from his chair. He thought it was his elders at the front door. In the parlour he found Margaret sorrowing for those whose mates had been torn from them, and Jean with a face flushed by talk. On ordinary occasions the majesty of the minister still cowed Jean, so that she could only gaze at him without shaking when in church, and then because she wore a veil. In the manse he was for taking a glance at sideways, and then going away comforted, as a respectable woman may once or twice in a day look at her brooch in the pasteboard box as a means of helping her with her work. But with such a to-do in Thrums, and she the possessor of exclusive information, Jean's reverence for Gavin only took her to-day as far as the door, where she lingered half in the parlour and half in the lobby, her eyes turned politely from the minister, but her ears his entirely. "I thought I heard Jean telling you about the capture of an Egyptian woman," Gavin said to his mother nervously. "Did you cry to me?" Jean asked, turning round longingly. "But maybe the mistress will tell you about the Egyptian hersel." "Has she been taken to Tilliedrum?" Gavin asked in a hollow voice. "Sup your porridge, Gavin," Margaret said. "I'll have no speaking about this terrible night till you've eaten something." "I have no appetite," the minister replied, pushing his plate from him. "Jean, answer me." "Deed, Dan," said Jean willingly, "they hinna ta'en her to Tilliedrum." "For what reason?" asked Gavin, his dread increasing. "For the reason that they couldna catch her." Jean answered. She spirited herself away, the magerful crittur. What? But I heard you say Ay, they had her since, but they couldna keep her. It's like a witch story. They had her safe in the town house, and baith shirra and captain guarding her, and syne in a clink she wasna there. All nicht they looked for her, but she hadna left so muckle as a footprint ahint her, and in the tail o' the day they had to whip their tap in their lap and march away without her." Gavin's appetite returned. "Has she been seen since the soldiers went away?" he asked, laying down his spoon with a new fear. "Where is she now?" "No human eye has seen her," Jean answered impressively. "Whaur is she now? Whaur does the flies vanish to in winter? We ken they're some gait, but whaur? But what are the people saying about her?" "Daft things," said Jean. "Old Charles Yuval gangs the length o' hinting that she's dead and buried." "She could not have buried herself, Jean," Margaret said mildly. "I dinna ken. Charles says she's even capable o' that." Then Jean retired reluctantly, but leaving the door ajar, and Gavin fell to on his porridge. He was now so cheerful that Margaret wondered. "If half the stories about this gypsy be true," she said, "she must be more than a mere woman." "Less, you mean, mother," Gavin said, with conviction. "She is a woman, and a sinful one." "Did you see her, Gavin?" "I saw her. Mother, she flouted me." "The daring tawpie!" exclaimed Margaret. "She is all that," said the minister. "Was she dressed just like an ordinary gypsy body? But you don't notice clothes much, Gavin." "Oh, I noticed hers," Gavin said slowly. "She was in a green and red, I think, and barefooted." "Ay," shouted Jean from the kitchen, startling both of them, "but she had a langy green like cloak too. She was seen jouking up closes in't." Gavin rose, considerably annoyed, and shut the parlour door. "Was she as bonny as folks say?" asked Margaret. "Jean says they speak of her beauty as unearthly." "Beauty of her kind," Gavin explained learnedly, "is neither earthly nor heavenly." He was seeing things as they are very clear now. "What," he said, "is mere physical beauty?" "Pooh!" "And yet," said Margaret, "the soul surely does speak through the face to some extent." "Do you really think so, mother?" Gavin asked, a little uneasily. "I have always noticed it," Margaret said, and then her son sighed. "But I would let no face influence me a jot," he said, recovering. "Ah, Gavin, I'm thinking I'm the reason you pay so little regard to women's faces. It's no natural." "You spoilt me, you see, mother, for ever caring for another woman. I would compare her to you, and then where would she be?" "Some time," Margaret said, "you'll think differently." "Never," answered Gavin, with a violence that ended the conversation. Soon afterwards he set off for the town, and in passing down the garden walk cast a guilty glance at the summer seat. Something black was lying in one corner of it. He stopped irresolutely, for his mother was nodding to him from her window. Then he disappeared into the little arbour. What had caught his eye was a Bible. On the previous day, as he now remembered, he had been called away while studying in the garden, and had left his Bible on the summer seat, a pencil between its pages. Not often, probably, had the Egyptian passed a night in such company. But what was this? Gavin had not to ask himself the question. The gypsy's cloak was lying neatly folded at the other end of the seat. Why had the woman not taken it with her? Hardly had he put this question when another stood in front of it. What was to be done with the cloak? He dared not leave it there for Jean to discover. He could not take it to the manse in daylight. Beneath the seat was a tool chest without a lid, and into this he crammed the cloak. Then, having turned the box face downwards, he went about his duties. But many a time during the day he shivered to the marrow, reflecting suddenly that at this very moment Jean might be carrying the accursed thing, at arm's length, like a dog in disgrace, to his mother. Now, let those who think that Gavin has not yet paid toll for taking the road with the Egyptian follow the adventures of the cloak. Shortly after gloaming fell that night, Jean encountered her master in the lobby of the manse. He was carrying something, and when he saw her he slipped it behind his back. Had he passed her openly she would have suspected nothing, but this made her look at him. "Why do you stare so, Jean?" Gavin asked, conscience stricken, and he stood with his back to the wall until she had retired in bewilderment. "I have noticed her watching me sharply all day," he said to himself, though it was only he who had been watching her. Gavin carried the cloak to his bedroom, thinking to lock it away in his chest, but it looked so wicked lying there that he seemed to see it after the lid was shut. The garret was the best place for it. He took it out of the chest and was opening his door gently when there was Jean again. She had been employed very innocently in his mother's room, but he said tartly, "Jean, I really cannot have this," which sent Jean to the kitchen with her apron at her eyes. Gavin stowed the cloak beneath the garret bed, and an hour afterwards was engaged on his sermon when he distinctly heard someone in the garret. He ran up the ladder with a terrible brow for Jean, but it was not Jean, it was Margaret. "Mother," he said in alarm, "what are you doing here?" "I'm only tidying up the garret, Gavin." "Yes, but it is too cold for you. Did Jean ask you to come up here?" "Jean? She knows her place better." Gavin took Margaret down to the parlour, but his confidence in the garret had gone. He stole up the ladder again, dragging the cloak from its lurking place, and took it into the garden. He very nearly met Jean in the lobby again, but hearing him coming she fled precipitately, which he thought very suspicious. In the garden he dug a hole, and there buried the cloak, but even now he was not done with it. He was wakened early by a noise of scraping in the garden, and his first thought was "Jean," but peering from the window he saw that the resurrectionist was a dog, which already had its teeth in the cloak. That forenoon Gavin left the manse unostentatiously carrying a brown paper parcel. He proceeded to the hill, and, having dropped the parcel there, retired hurriedly. On his way home, nevertheless, he was overtaken by D. Fittis, who had been cutting down whins. Fittis had seen the parcel fall, and running after Gavin, returned it to him. Gavin thanked D. Fittis, and then sat down gloomily on the cemetery dyke. Half an hour afterwards he flung the parcel into the Tillyloss garden. In the evening Margaret had news for him, got from Jean. "Do you remember, Gavin, that the Egyptian every one is still speaking of wore a long cloak? Well, would you believe it? The cloak was Captain Halliwell's, and she took it from the town house when she escaped. She is supposed to have worn it inside out. He did not discover that it was gone until he was leaving Thrums." "Mother, is this possible?" Gavin said. "The policeman, Weir, has told it. He was ordered, it seems, to look for the cloak quietly and to take anyone into custody in whose possession it was found." "Has it been found?" "No." The minister walked out of the parlour, for he could not trust his face. What was to be done now? The cloak was lying in Mason Baxter's garden, and Baxter was therefore in all probability within 24 hours of the Tilliedrum goal. "Does Mr. Dishart ever wear a cap at nichts?" Femie Wilkie asked Sam'l Fairweather 3 hours later. Na, he has ower muckle respect for his lamhat," answered Sam'l, "and richtly, for it's the crowning stone of the edifice." "Then it couldna have been him I met at the back o' Tillyloss the now," said Femie. "Though the like him it was, he jouk it back when he saw me." While Femie was telling her story in the Tenements, Mason Baxter, standing at the window which looked into his garden, was shouting, "What's that in my yard?" There was no answer, and Baxter closed his window, under the impression that he had been speaking to a cat. The man in the cap then emerged from the corner where he had been crouching, and stealthily felt for something among the cabbages and pea sticks. It was no longer there, however, and by he retired empty-handed. "The Egyptian's cloak has been found," Margaret was able to tell Gavin next day. "Mason Baxter found it yesterday afternoon." "In his garden?" Gavin asked hurriedly. "No, in the quarry, he says, but according to Jean he is known not to have been at the quarry to day. Some seem to think that the gypsy gave him the cloak for helping her to escape, and that he has delivered it up lest he should get into difficulties." "Whom has he given it to, mother?" Gavin asked. "To the policeman." "And has Weary sent it back to Halliwell?" "Yes, he told Jean he sent it off at once with the information that the masons had found it in the quarry." The next day was Sabbath, when the new trial, now to be told, awaited Gavin in the pulpit, but it had nothing to do with the cloak, of which I may here record the end. Weary had not forwarded it to its owner. Meggy, his wife, took care of that. It made its reappearance in Thrums several months after the riot as 2 pairs of Sabbath breeks for her sons, James and Andrew. End of chapter 9. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 10 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 10. First Sermon Against Women. On the afternoon of the following Sabbath, as I have said, something strange happened in the Auld Licht pulpit. The congregation, despite their troubles, turned it over and peered at it for days, but had they seen into the inside of it, they would have weaved few webs until the session had sat on the minister. The affair baffled me at the time, and for the Egyptian's sake I would avoid mentioning it now, were it not one of Gavin's milestones. It includes the first of his memorable sermons against woman. I was not in the Auld Licht church that day, but I heard of the sermon before night. And this, I think, is as good an opportunity as another for showing how the gossip about Gavin reached me up here in the Glen schoolhouse. Since Margaret and her son came to the manse, I had kept the vow made to myself and avoided Thrums. Only once had I ventured to the kirk, and then, instead of taking my old seat, the fourth from the pulpit, I sat down near the plate, where I could look at Margaret without her seeing me. To spare her that agony, I even stole away as the last word of the benediction was pronounced, and my haste scandalized many, for with Auld Lichts it is not customary to retire quickly from the church after the manner of the godless UPs, and the Free Kirk is little better, who have their hats in their hands when they rise for benediction, so that they may at once pour out like a burst dam. We resume our seats, look straight before us, clear our throats, and stretch out our hands for our womenfolk to put our hats into them. In time we do get out, but I am never sure how. One may gossip in a glen on Sabbaths, though not in a town, without losing his character, and I used to await the return of my neighbour, the farmer of Waster Lunny, and of Silva Birse, the Glen Quharity post, at the end of the schoolhouse path. Waster Lunny was a man whose care in his leisure hours was to keep from his wife his great pride in her. His horse, Catlaw, on the other hand, he told outright what he thought of it, praising it to its face and blackguarding it as it deserved, and I have seen him, when completely baffled by the brute, sit down before it on a stone and thus harangue: "You think you're clever, Catlaw, my lass, but you're mista'en. You're a thrawn limmer, that's what you are. You think you have blood in you. You hae blood. Get away, the dinner blether. I tell you what, Catlaw, I met a man yestreen that kent your mither, and he says she was a fecky fusionless besom. What do you say to that?" As for the post, I will say no more of him than that his bitter topic was the unreasonableness of humanity, which treated him graciously when he had a letter for it, but scowled at him when he had none. Aye, implying that I hae a letter, but kept it back. On the Sabbath evening after the riot, I stood at the usual place awaiting my friends, and saw before they reached me that they had something untoward to tell. The farmer, his wife, and 3 children, holding each other's hands stretched across the road. Birse was a little behind, but a conversation was being kept up by shouting. All were walking the Sabbath pace, and the family having started half a minute in advance, the post had not yet made up on them. "It's sitting to snaw," Waster Lunny said, drawn near, and just as I was to reply, "It is so," Silva slipped in the words before me. "You wasna at the kirk," was Elspeth's salutation. I had been at the Glen church, but did not contradict her, for it is established, so neither here nor there. I was anxious, too, to know what their long faces meant, and so asked at once, "Was Mr. Dishart on the riot?" "Forenoon, aye. Afternoon, no," replied Waster Lunny, walking round his wife to get nearer me. "Dominie, a queery thing happened in the kirk this day, sich as—" "Waster Lunny," interrupted Elspeth sharply, "have you on your Sabbath shoon, or have you no on your Sabbath shoon?" "Guid care you took I should hae the daggont uncanny things on," retorted the farmer. "Keep out o' the gutter then," said Elspeth, "on the Lord's day." "Him," said her man, "that is forced by a foolish woman to wear genteel elastic-sided boots canna forget them till he takes them off. Whaur's the extra reverence in wearing shoon twa sizes ower small?" "It mayna be mair reverent," suggested Birse, to whom Elspeth's kitchen was a pleasant place, "but it's grand, and you canna expect to be baith grand and comfortable." I reminded them that they were speaking of Mr. Dishart. "We was saying," began the post briskly, "that it was me that was saying it," said Waster Lunny. "So, Dominie, haud your gobs, both o' you.
interrupted Elspeth. "You've been roaring the story to ane another till you're hoarse." "In the forenoon," Waster Lunny went on determinedly, "Mr. Dishart preached on the riot, and fine he was. Oh, dominie, you should hae heard him ladling it on to Lang Tammas, no by name, but in sic a way that there was no mistaking what he was preaching at. Oh, losh, Tammas got it strong." "But he's dull in the uptake," broke in the post. "By what I expected. I spoke to him after the sermon, and I says, just to see if he was properly humbled, 'Ay, Tammas,' I says, 'them that discourse was preached against winna think themselves 7 feet men for a while again.' 'Ay, Birse,' he answers, 'and glad I am to hear you admit it, for he had you in his eye.' I was fair scunnered at Tammas that day." "Mr. Dishart was preaching at the whole clanjamfray of you," said Elspeth. "Maybe he was," said her husband, leering, "but you needna cast it at us, for, my certie, if the men got it frae him in the forenoon, the women got it in the afternoon." "Oh, he read them up most michty," said the post. "Thae was his very words, or something like them. 'Adam,' says he, 'was an erring man, but aside Eve he was respectable.'" "Ay, but it wasna a woman he meant," Elspeth explained, "for when he said that, he pointed his finger direct at T'nowhead's lassie, and I hope it'll do her good." "But I wonder," I said, "that Mr. Dishart chose such a subject to day. I thought he would be on the riot at both services." "You'll wonder mair," said Elspeth, "when you hear what happened afore he began the afternoon sermon. But I canna get in a word wi' that man o' mine." "We've been speaking about it," said Birse, "ever since we left the kirk door. Tod, we've been sawing it like seed all along the glen." "And we meant to tell you about it at once," said Waster Lunny, "but there's aye so muckle to say about a minister. Dagont, the high ane keeps a body out o' languor. Ay, but this breaks the drum. Dominie, either Mr. Dishart was not weel, or he was in the devil's grip." This startled me, for the farmer was looking serious. "He was weel eneuch," said Birse, "for a heap o' folk speired at Jean if he had ta'en his porridge as usual, and she admitted he had, but the lassie was skeered herself, and said it was a mercy Mrs. Dishart wasna in the kirk." "Why was she not there?" I asked anxiously. "Oh, he winna let her out in sic weather." "I wish you would tell me what happened," I said to Elspeth. "So I will," she answered, "if Waster Lunny would haud his wheesht for a minute. You see, the afternoon diet began in the ordinary way, and was a' richt until we came to the sermon. 'You will find my text,' he says in his piercing voice, 'in the 8th chapter of Ezra.' And at thae words," said Waster Lunny, "my heart gae a loup, for Ezra is an unca ill book to find, ay, and so's Ruth." "I kent a bush o' the Bible by heart," says Elspeth scornfully, "when I was a 6-year auld." "So did I," said Waster Lunny, "and I ken them yet, except when I'm hurried. When Mr. Dishart gave out Ezra, he sort o' keeked round the kirk to find out if he had puzzled onybody, and so there was a kind of competition among the congregation what would lay hand on it first. That was what doited me. Ay, there was Ruth when she wasna wanted, but Ezra, dagont, it looked as if Ezra had jumped clean out o' the Bible." "You wasna the only distressed creature," said his wife. "I was ashamed to see Eppie McLaren looking up the order of the books at the beginning of the Bible." "Tibbie Burns was even mair brazen," said the post. "The sly little cuttie opened at Kings and pretended it was Ezra." "None o' thae things would I do," said Waster Lunny, "and Sal, I daredna, for David Lunnon was glowering over my shoulder. You may scrowl at me, Elspeth Proctor, but as far back as I can mind Ezra has done me. Mony a time afore I start for the kirk I take my Bible to a quiet place and look Ezra up. In the very pew I says canny to myself, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, the which should be a help. But the moment the minister gies out that awful book, away goes Ezra like the Egyptian." "And you after her," said Elspeth, "like the weavers that wouldna fecht. You make a windmill of your Bible." "Oh, I winna admit I'm beat. Never mind. There's queer things in the world forbye Ezra. How is cripples aye so puffed up mair than other folks? How does flour bread aye fall on the butter side?" I will mind, said Elspeth, for I was terrified the minister would admonish you frae the pulpit. He couldna hae done that, for was he no baffled to find Ezra himself? Him no find Ezra, cried Elspeth. I hae telled you a dozen times he found it as easy as you could yoke a horse. The thing can be explained in no other way, said her husband doggedly, if he was weel and in sound mind. Maybe the dominie can clear it up, suggested the post, him being a scholar. Well, then tell me what happened, I asked. God's sake, ha' we no telled you? Birse said. I thought we had. It was a terrible scene, said Elspeth, giving her husband a shove. As I said, Mr. Dishart gave out Ezra 8th. Weel, I turned it up in a jiffy and signed look cautiously to see how Eppie McLaren was getting on. Just at that minute I heard a groan from the pulpit. It didna stop short of a groan. Ay, you may be sure I looked quick at the minister, and there I saw a sicht that would ha' made the grand escape. His face was as white as a baker's, and he had sort of fallen against the back of the pulpit, staring demented like at his open Bible. And I saw him, said the Birse, put up his hand atween him and the book, as if he thought it was to jump at him. Twice, said Elspeth, he tried to speak, and twice he let the words fall away. That, says Waster Lunny, the whole congregation admits, but I didna see it myself, for at this time you may picture me a hunting savage like for Ezra. I thought the minister was waiting till I found it. Hendry Munn, said Birse, stood upon one leg, wondering whether he should run to the session house for a glass of water. By that time, said Elspeth, the fit had left Mr. Dishart, or rather it had ta'en a new turn. He grew red, and it's gospel that he stomped his foot. He had the face of one using bad words, said the post. He didn't swear, of course, but that was the face he had on. I missed it, said Waster Lunny, for I was in full cry after Ezra, with the sweat running down me face. But the most astounding thing has yet to be told, went on Elspeth. The minister shook himself like one wakening from a nasty dream, and he cries in a voice of thunder, just as if he was shaking his fist at somebody. He cries, Birse interposed cleverly, he cries, you will find the text in Genesis, chapter 3, verse 6. Yes, said Elspeth. First he gave out one text, and then he gave out another, being the most amazing thing to my mind that ever happened in the town of Thrums. What will our children's children think o't? I wouldna ha' missed it for a pound note. Nar me, said Waster Lunny, though only got the tale o' Dominie no sooner he said Genesis 3rd and 6th than I lay my finger on Ezra. Was it no provoking? Onybody can turn up Genesis, but it needs an able-bodied man to find Ezra. He preached on the fall, Elspeth said, for an hour and 25 minutes. But powerful though he was, I would rather he had told us what made him gie the go-by to Ezra. All I can say, said Waster Lunny, is that I never heard him mair inspiring. Where has he got such a knowledge of women? He riddled them, he fair riddled them, till I was ashamed of being married. Isn't easy cant where he got his knowledge of women, Birse explained. It's in the original Hebrew. You can hawk only mortal thing out of the original Hebrew, the which all ministers hae at their finger ends. What else makes them ken to jump a verse now and then when giving out a psalm? It wasna women like me he denounced, Elspeth insisted, but young lassies that leads men astray with their abominable wheedling ways. Tod, said her husband, if they try their hands on Mr. Dishart, they'll meet their match. They will, chuckled the post. The Hebrew's a grand thing, though tucht, I'm telled meaty tucht. His sublimest burst, Waster Lunny came back to tell me, was about the beauty of the soul being everything, and the beauty of the face no worth a snuff. What a scorn he has for bonny faces and tomb souls. I dinna deny but what a bonny face fell takes me, but Mr. Dishart wouldna gie a blade of grass for it. Ay, and I used to think that in their foolishness about women there was daggoned little differ atween the unlearned and the highly educated. The gossip about Gavin brought hitherto to the schoolhouse had been as bread to me, but this I did not like, For a minister to behave thus was as unsettling to us as a change of government to Londoners, and I decided to give my scholars a holiday on the morrow and tramp into the town for fuller news. But all through the night it snowed, and next day, and then intermittently for many days, and every fall took the school miles farther away from Thrums. Birse and the Crows had now the Glen road to themselves, and even Birse had twice or thrice to bed with me. At these times had he not been so interested in describing his progress through the snow, maintaining that the crying want of our Glen road was palings for postmen to kick their feet against, he must have wondered why I always turned the talk to the Auld Licht minister. "Only explanation o' a sudden change of text," Birse said, repeating my question. "Tod, and there is and to spare, for I hear tell there's 16 explanations on the Tenements alone. As Tammas Haggart says, that's a blessing, for if there had been just the twa explanations, the kirk micht ha' split on them." "Ay," he said at another time, "twa or three even dared to question the minister, but I'm thinking they made nothing o't. The majority agrees he was just inspired to change his text. But Lang Tammas is dour. Tammas telled the session a queer thing. He says that after the diet o' worship on that eventful afternoon, Mr. Dishart carried the Bible out of the pulpit instead of leaving that duty as usual to the kirk officer. Weel, Tammas, being precentor, has a richt, as you ken, to leave the kirk by the session house door, just like the minister himself. He did so that afternoon, and what, think you, did he see? He saw Mr. Dishart tearing a page out of the Bible and flinging it savagely into the session house fire. You dinna credit it. Weel, it's staggering, and there's Hendry Munn's evidence too. Hendry took his first chance of looking up Ezra in the minister's Bible, and behold, the page with the 8th chapter was gone. Them that thinks Tammas wasna blind with excitement odds it had been Ezra 8th that gaed into the fire. Onyway, there's no doubt about the pages being missing, for whatever excitement Tammas was in, Hendry was as cool as ever. A week later Birse told me that the congregation had decided to regard the incident as adding lustre to their kirk. This was largely, I fear, because it could then be used to belittle the established minister. That fervent Auld Licht, Snecky Hobart, feeling that Gavin's action was unsound, had gone on the following Sabbath to the parish kirk and sat under Mr. Duthie. But Mr. Duthie was a close reader, so that Snecky flung himself about in his pew in misery. The minister concluded his sermon with these words: "But on this subject I will say no more at present." "Because you canna," Snecky roared, and strutted out of the church. Comparing the two scenes, it is obvious that the Auld Lichts had won a victory. After preaching impromptu for an hour and 25 minutes, it could never be said of Gavin that he needed to read. He became more popular than ever. Yet the change of text was not forgotten. If in the future any other indictments were brought against him, it would certainly be pinned to them. I marvelled long over Gavin's jump from Ezra to Genesis, and at this his first philippic against woman, but I have known the cause for many a year. The Bible was the one that had lain on the summer seat while the Egyptian hid there. It was the great pulpit Bible which remains in the church as a rule, but Gavin had taken it home the previous day to make some of its loose pages secure with paste. He had studied from it on the day preceding the riot, but had used a small Bible during the rest of the week. When he turned in the pulpit to Ezra, where he had left the large Bible open in the summer seat, he found this scrawled across chapter 8. "I will never tell who flung the clod at Captain Halliwell. But why did you fling it? I will never tell that you allowed me to be called Mrs. Dishart before witnesses. But is this not a Scotch marriage?" Signed, Babbie the Egyptian. End of chapter 10. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. Chapter 11 of The Little Minister. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State. The Little Minister by J. M. Barrie. Chapter 11 tells in a whisper of man's fall during the curling season. No snow could be seen in Thrums by the beginning of the year, though clods of it lay in Waster Lunny's fields, where his hens wandered all day as if looking for something they had dropped.
A black frost had set in, and one walking on the glen road could imagine that through the cracks in it he saw a loch glistening. From my door I could hear the roar of curling stones at Rashie Bog, which is almost 4 miles nearer Thrums. On the day I am recalling, I see that I only made one entry in my diary. At last bought Waster Lunny's bantams. Well do I remember the transaction, and no wonder, for I had all but bought the bantams every day for a 6 months. About noon the doctor's dogcart was observed by all the tenements standing at the Auld Licht manse. The various surmises were wrong. Margaret had not been suddenly taken ill. Jean had not swallowed a darning needle. The minister had not walked out at his study window in a moment of sublime thought. Gavin stepped into the dogcart, which at once drove off in the direction of Rashie Bog, but equally in error were those who said that the doctor was making a curler of him. There was, however, ground for gossip, for Thrums folk seldom called in a doctor until it was too late to cure them, and McQueen was not the man to pay social visits. Of his skill we knew fearsome stories, as that by looking at Archie Allardyce, who had come to broken bones on a ladder, he discovered which rung Archie fell from. When he entered a stuffy room he would poke his staff through the window to let in fresh air, and then fling down a shilling to pay for the breakage. He was deaf in the right ear, and therefore usually took the left side of prosy people, thus, as he explained, making a blessing of an affliction. "A pity I don't hear better," I have heard him say. "Not at all. If my misfortune, as you call it, were to be removed, you can't conceive how I should miss my deaf ear." He was a fine fellow, though brusque, and I never saw him without his pipe until 2 days before we buried him, which was 25 years ago come Martinmas. "We're all quite weel," Jean said apprehensively, as she answered his knock on the manse door, and she tried to be pleasant too, for well she knew that if a doctor willed it she could have a fever in 5 minutes. "Ay, Jean, I'll soon alter that," he replied ferociously. "Is the master in?" "He's at his sarmon," Jean said with importance. To interrupt the minister at such a moment seemed sacrilege to her, for her upbringing had been good. Her mother had once fainted in church, but though the family's distress was great, they neither bore her out nor signed to the kirk officer to bring water. They propped her up in the pew in a respectful attitude, joining in the singing meanwhile, and she recovered in time to look up 2 Chronicles 21:7. "Tell him I want to speak to him at the door," said the doctor fiercely, "or I'll bleed you this minute." McQueen would not enter because his horse might have seized the opportunity to return stablewards. At the houses where it was accustomed to stop it drew up of its own accord, knowing where the doctor's cases were as well as himself, but it resented new patients. "You like misery, I think, Mr. Dishart," McQueen said when Gavin came to him. "At least I am always finding you in the thick of it, and that is why I am here now. I'd have a rare job for you if you'll jump into the machine. You know Nanny Webster, who lives on the edge of Windyghoul? No, you don't, for she belongs to the other kirk. Well, at all events, you knew her brother Sanders, the mole catcher?" "I remember him." "You mean the man who boasted so much about seeing a ball at Lord Rintoul's place?" "The same, and as you may know, his boasting about maltreating policemen whom he never saw led to his being sentenced to 9 months in gaol lately." "That is the man," said Gavin. "I never liked him." "No, but his sister did," McQueen answered dryly, "and with reason, for he was her breadwinner, and now she is starving. Anything I can give her would be too little, sir, but the neighbours, she has few near her, and though the Thrums poor help each other bravely, they are at present nigh as needy as herself. Nanny is coming to the poorhouse, Mr. Dishart." "God help her!" exclaimed Gavin. "Nonsense," said the doctor, trying to make himself a hard man. "She will be properly looked after there, and in time she will like it." "Don't let my mother hear you speaking of taking an old woman to that place," Gavin said, looking anxiously up the stair. I cannot pretend that Margaret never listened. "You all speak as if the poorhouse was a goal," the doctor said testily. "But so far as Nanny is concerned, everything is arranged. I promised to drive her to the poorhouse today, and she is waiting for me now. Don't look at me as if I was a brute. She is to take some of her things with her to the poorhouse, and the rest is to be left until Sanders' return, when she may rejoin him. At least we said that to her to comfort her." "You want me to go with you?" "Yes, though I warn you it may be a distressing scene. Indeed, the truth is that I am loath to face Nanny alone today."
Mr. Duthie should have accompanied me, for the Websters are established kirk. Ay, and so he would if Rashie Bog had not been barren. A terrible snare this curling, Mr. Dishart." Here the doctor sighed. "I have known Mr. Duthie wait until midnight struck on Sabbath, and then be off to Rashie Bog with a torch." "I will go with you," Gavin said, putting on his coat. "Jump in then. You won't smoke?" "I never see a respectable man not smoking, sir, but I feel indignant with him for such sheer waste of time." Gavin smiled at this, and Snecky Hobart, who happened to be keeking over the manse dyke, bore the news to the Tenements. "I'll no sleep this nicht," Snecky said, "for wondering what made the minister luck. Ay, it would be no trifle." A minister, it is certain, who wore a smile on his face would never have been called to the Auld Licht kirk, for life is a wrestle with the devil, and only the frivolous think to throw him off without taking off their coats. Yet though Gavin's zeal was what the congregation reverenced, many loved him privately for his boyishness. He could unbend at marriages, of which he had 6 on the last day of the year, and at every one of them he joked the same joke like a layman. Some did not approve of his playing at the teetotum for 10 minutes with Kitty Dundas's invalid son, but the way Kitty boasted about it would have disgusted anybody. At the present day there are probably a score of Gavins in Thrums, all called after the little minister, and there is one Gavinia whom he hesitated to christen. He made humorous remarks, the same remark, about all these children, and his smile as he patted their heads was for thinking over when one's work was done for the day. The doctor's horse clattered up the back wind noisily, as if a minister behind made no difference to it. Instead of climbing the Roods, however, the nearest way to Nanny's, it went westward, which Gavin in a reverie did not notice. The truth must be told. The Egyptian was in his head. "Have I fallen deaf in the left ear too?" said the doctor. "I see your lips moving, but I don't catch a syllable." Gavin started, coloured, and flung the gypsy out of the trap. "Why are we not going up the Roods?" he asked. "Well," said the doctor slowly, "at the top of the Roods there is a stance for circuses, and this old beast of mine won't pass it. You know, unless you're behind in the clashes and clavers of Thrums, that I bought her from the manager of a travelling show. She was the horse Lightning, they called her, that galloped round the ring at a mile an hour, and so at the top of the Roods she is still unmanageable. She once dragged me to the scene of her former triumphs, and went revolving around it, dragging the machine after her." "If you had not explained that," said Gavin, "I might have thought that you wanted to pass by Rashie Bog." The doctor, indeed, was already standing up to catch a first glimpse of the curlers. "Well," he admitted, "I might have managed to pass the circus ring, though what I have told you is true. However, I have not come this way merely to see how the match is going. I want to shame Mr. Duthie for neglecting his duty. It will help me to do mine, for the Lord knows I am finding it hard with the music of those stones in my ears." "I never saw it played before," Gavin said, standing up in his turn. "What a din they make. McQueen, I believe they're fighting." No," said the excited doctor. "They're just a bit daft. That's the proper spirit for the game. Look, that's the Baron Bailie near standing on his head, and there's Mr. Duthie off his head altogether. Yon's twa weavers and a mason cursing the laird, and the man with the besom is the master of Crumnathie." "A democracy at all events," said Gavin. "Oh, by no means," said the doctor. "It's an aristocracy of intellect. Gie up Lightning, or the frost will be gone before we are there." "It is my opinion, doctor," said Gavin, "that you will have bones to set before that game is finished. I can see nothing but legs now." "Don't say a word against curling, sir, to me," said McQueen, whom the sight of a game in which he must not play had turned crusty. "Dangerous! It's the best medicine I know of. Look at the man coming across the field. That is Joe Strahan." "Well, sir, curling saved Joe's life after I had given him up. You don't believe me? Hi, Joe Strahan, come here and tell the minister how curling put you on your legs again." Strahan came forward, a tough little wizened man, with red flannel round his ears to keep out the cold. "It's gospel what the doctor says, Mr. Dishart," he declared. "Me and my brither Sandy was baith ill and in the same bed, and the doctor had hopes o' Sandy, but nane o' me. When I heard that, I thought I micht as well die on the ice as in my bed. So I up and on wi' me claes. Sandy was mad at me, for he was no curler, and he says, Joe Strahan, if you gang up the Rashie bog, you'll assuredly be brocht home a corp." I didna heed him though, and off I gaed. "And I see you did not die," said Gavin. "Not me," answered the fish cager with a grin. "Na, but the joke it was Sandy that died." "Not the joke, Joe," corrected the doctor. "The moral." "Ay, the moral. I'm aye forgetting the word." McQueen, enjoying Gavin's discomfiture, turned lightning down the Rashie Bog road, which would be impassable as soon as the thaw came. In summer, Rashie Bog is several fields in which a cart does not sink unless it stands still, but in winter it is a loch with here and there a spring where dead men are said to lie. There are no rushes at its east end, and here the dog cart drew up near the curlers, a crowd of men dancing, screaming, shaking their fists and sweeping, while 100 onlookers got in their way, gesticulating and advising. "Hold me tight," the doctor whispered to Gavin, "or I'll be leaving you to drive Nanny to the poorhouse by yourself." He had no sooner said this than he tried to jump out of the trap. "You dunnert fule, John Robbie," he shouted to a player. "Soup her up, man, soup her up. No, dinna, leave her alane. Bailey, leave her alane, you blazing idiot." "Mr. Dishart, let me go. What do you mean, sir, by hanging on to my coat tails? Dang it all, Duthie's winning. He has it. "You're to play, doctor," some cried, running to the dog cart. "I missed you, sir." "James, no, I darena." "Then we get our licks. I never saw the minister in sich form. We can do nothing against him." "Then," cried McQueen, "I'll play. Come on, Will, I'll play. Let go my tails, Mr. Dishart, or I'll cut them off. Duty fiddlesticks." "Shame on you, sir," said Gavin. "Yes, and on you others who would entice him from his duty." "Shame!" the doctor cried. "Look at Mr. Duthie, is he ashamed? And yet the man has been reproving me for 12 months because I've refused to become one of his elders. Duthie," he shouted, "think shame of yourself for curling this day." Mr. Duthie had carefully turned his back to the trap, for Gavin's presence in it annoyed him. We seldom care to be reminded of our duty by seeing another do it. Now, however, he advanced to the dog cart, taking the far side of Gavin. "Put on your coat, Mr. Duthie," said the doctor, "and come with me to Nanny Webster's. You promised." Mr. Duthie looked quizzically at Gavin and then at the sky. "The thaw may come at any moment," he said. "I think the frost is to hold," said Gavin. "It may hold over to morrow," Mr. Duthie admitted, "but to morrow's the Sabbath, and so a lost day." "What?" exclaimed Gavin, horrified. "I only mean," Mr. Duthie answered, colouring, "that we can't curl on the Lord's day, and for what it may be like on Monday no one can say. No, doctor, I won't risk it. We're in the middle of a game, man." Gavin looked very grave. "I see what you're a thinking, Mr. Dishart," the old minister said doggedly, "but then you don't curl. You are very wise. I have forbidden my sons to curl." "Then you openly snap your fingers at your duty, Mr. Duthie?" said the doctor loftily. "You can let go my tails now, Mr. Dishart, for the madness has passed." "None of your virtuous airs, McQueen," said Mr. Duthie hotly. "What was the name of the doctor that warned women never to have bairns while it was hauding?" "And what," retorted McQueen, "was the name of the minister that told his session he would neither preach nor pray while the black frost lasted?" "Hoots, doctor," said Duthie. "Don't lose your temper because I'm in such a form." "Don't lose yours, Duthie, because I beat you." "You beat me, McQueen. Go home, sir, and don't talk havers. Who beat you at? Who made you sing Smollett? Who won? Who? "I'll play on Monday for whatever you like," shrieked the doctor. "If it holds," cried the minister, "I'll be here the whole day. Name the stakes yourself. A stone?" "No," the doctor said, "but I'll tell you what we'll play for. You've been dinging me doited about that eldership, and we'll play for it. If you win, I accept office." "Done," said the minister recklessly. The dog cart was now turned toward Windyghoul, its driver once more good humoured, but Gavin silent. "You would have been the better of my deaf ear just now, Mr. Dishart," McQueen said after the lock had been left behind. "Ay, and I'm thinking my pipe would soothe you. Don't take it so much to heart, man. I'll lick him easily. He's a decent man, the minister, but vanity of his play ridiculously vain. However, I think the sight of you in the place that should have been his has broken his nerve for the day, and our side may win yet." "I believe," said Gavin with sudden enlightenment, But you brought me here for that purpose." "Maybe," chuckled the doctor. "Maybe." Then he changed the subject suddenly. "Mr. Dishart," he asked, "were you ever in love?" "Never," answered Gavin, violently. "Well, well," said the doctor, "don't terrify the horse. I've been in love myself. It's bad, but it's nothing to curling."
End of chapter 11, recorded by Sylvia M.B. in Washington State.